Good morning. Welcome to the Cleveland Heights Council Finance Committee. I'm going to call this meeting to order at 10 a.m. on May 6, 2024. And the roll call for our committee is myself, Gail Larson, as chair, Vice Chair Anthony Maddox Jr. Here. Okay. And member Jim Posh is excused. We have with us also as guests Tara Schuster, our interim finance director, and Priyam Khan, the guidehouse consultant, and also sitting at the table are President Tony Kuda, Vice President Davida Russell, Councilmember Craig Cobb, and Councilmember Jim Petras. So thank you for joining us this morning. Priyam, would you go ahead and take those few minutes we talked about, please?
Great. Thank you, Chair Larson. Good morning, everyone. I thought I can't be there in person. Gosh, last time I felt like there were only a few of you. Now I see the table full, so it's great to see all of your faces. Thanks for having me this morning. I just wanted to level set with the city council members here. Last meeting we went through a presentation in terms of the process thus far that we undertook with the nonprofit organizations based on the amounts that you awarded like late last year via legislation. So today's meeting is really about, here are the list of the nonprofits and then their corresponding funding amounts and then next steps. So I do have a very brief kind of verbal presentation, and I will be sharing the spreadsheet that Tara has shared with Chair Larson and maybe others as well. And then I'm happy to answer any questions. I believe I see Tara in the room, and I also believe is the mayor in the room as well.
Administrator Williams is here.
Great. Okay. And that's all I have for you all right now. Is there anything else, Chair Larson, you want to with this?
No, we have a lot to cover, so I'd like to thank you very much. The primary goal of this meeting is to ensure that the Cleveland Heights City Council Committee, the city's administrative staff, and our ARPA consultant are all moving forward on allocating the city's ARPA funds with identical information. I want to pull that all together. In that spirit, I have given a worksheet to the council members for all of us to follow this morning that lists the dollars allocated by council in 2023, according to confirmation from our finance director Schuster, compared to the amounts awarded by Guidehouse to the 19 nonprofits that have requested ARPA funds. When we've completed that work, there may be some general questions for you, Priyam, that the committee may have for finance director Schuster or for Guidehouse staff member Khan. So with that in mind, does the spreadsheet have on there the list of awarded by council?
Priyam, are you gonna speak,
Go ahead, do that now.
You can see my screen.
I wanna zoom in slightly.
Does Priyam have to do the adjustment?
Cause it's from her screen.
I have 7 copies of what we're going through in case you can't roll up.
Thank you.
Just wanna take, you're welcome.
That's a little bit better.
Thank you.
All right, are you ready to get started?
Yes, please. Benjamin Rose Institute on Aging, we council awarded $200,000. And it looks like Benjamin Rose Institute qualified for $200,000 according to your criteria.
Yes.
Okay, that's great. The next one is Pride Among Daughters and Sisters. And we awarded $11,400. The organization will receive $11,400. Please let me know if you have questions as we go through this. That's a confirmation, which is great. Heights Libraries, council awarded $300,000. And you determined that $300,000 was eligible, so thank you. And Start Right Hunger, you awarded $60,000 and you have awarded $60,000. Still doing okay? Alright. Cleveland Chesed, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, so I apologize. Center, $50,000, you awarded $50,000. The Journey Center for Healing awarded $306,190 from council allocated, and then Guidehouse confirmed that award. The Belfair Training
It's for police training.
So we might, instead of doing that as a nonprofit, because it's going to be for the police training from Cleveland Heights, we just might do a regular vendor contract with them.
Okay,
So it wouldn't be a nonprofit, so it would be different reporting. That's why you don't see it on this list.
okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So would you say we're moving it over to the budget, to the city's budget then?
It's still gonna be part of the ARPA, it's just gonna be tracked like the ice rink is, and
Okay, it's the city's expenditure, okay.
yeah, it's a city expenditure.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Lake Erie Inc. Amount that we allocated, council allocated is $104,900, and award by the criteria of Guidehouse is $1,000 less. Please explain that, Priyam.
Sure. So we had a series of technical assistance sessions with all of the nonprofits, or majority of the nonprofits, and we went back and forth with a few of them, including Lake Erie Inc. And they actually submitted a revised budget to us based on our technical assistance sessions, and that involved, eligibility considerations, as well as what was acceptable under the federal guidance in terms of the budget line items. So they actually submitted this revised budget for $1,000 less. And so, they were okay with it, so we went ahead and covered. And that was just due to a few program changes.
Great, thank you so much. Culture Kids, council allocated $15,000, Culture Kids was awarded $15,000. Reaching Heights was awarded $75,000, and, I skipped one, Building Heights was awarded $244,259, and it was reduced by $260. So that's a small tweak, but what was the reason for it, please?
Yeah, it was one of their budget line items, and it, program change, and this was something they also had submitted for us as a revised budget. So their proposed budget be approved.
Excellent.
I'll see on.
Yeah, I
I
don't see it on
see
this,
building heights on the.
on your sheet.
Oh, that's my fault.
Okay.
That's my
Just
fault.
add it.
Yeah.
Sorry, we had a moment of Larson's elimination of a program, which we certainly did not intend to. So we can just write it in, okay?
What was that, $243.99 originally?
244, 250,
Oh, that's the new amount.
the new amount of 240.
Okay. After building heights, we have reaching heights. Council awarded $75,000 and the Criterion from Guidehouse also awarded $75,000. Family Connections, we allocated $77,000 and they were awarded $10,550, so their amount is $66,450. So can you explain that, please, Priya?
Sure, so this was a decision made mutually through our technical assistance sessions. And upon reviewing the Family Connections budget, we did find that there were some allocations that were ineligible. I believe they were specifically for staffing that did not relate to their program staffing that they proposed for the ARPA funding. And so they went ahead and submitted a revised budget and we agreed to it.
Sorry, that number should be $77,000. Also a Larson error.
Where it says 17?
Yes,
Okay.
Yes.
quite a big difference.
So it's actually 66?
64,
66,450.
66,450, yep. Artful is next. Council awarded $71,000 and Guidehouse confirmed it at $61,800 with a decrease of $9,200. So it's all yours, Priam.
Yes, so for this one, originally they submitted their application and did not have a specific program or a budget that included specific line items for the ARPA funding, which is a requirement in our review in our grant application. So with a couple of technical assistance sessions, we were able to work out what may be eligible, and they did submit a revised budget for this amount in which we approved.
Everybody okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay. Heights Arts, council awarded $250,000 and Guidehouse confirmed that amount at $250,000. Welcome, Mayor.
Thank you, Chairman.
The Coventry Village Yes, that's next. Coventry Village SID, council awarded $313,560. Guidehouse confirmed it at $313,560. And the Cleveland Heights Improvement Corp, council allocated $300,000 and Guidehouse
Pending. Those last four pending addition.
Oh, okay, so Prem, can you talk specifically why each of these line items is pending, please? Starting with
Sure.
Cleveland Heights Improvement.
No problem. And Mayor, please feel free to weigh in. So for Road 21, Cleveland Heights Improvement Corporation, our understanding is that this is still very much going to be formed. It is not an established, there's not an established group of folks decided upon in terms of running the organization, as well as leadership. There are a few unknowns, but I know this is something that's important to the city that they want to go ahead and have ARPA dollars reserved for future planning and implementation. And so with that, this particular one, we are, overall in terms of eligibility, it is fine under the federal guidance. It's just a matter of the funding source. And this one, we felt that it would be better under a different category versus the nonprofit grants. And anyone from the city would like to weigh in?
From my perspective, I think that says it all.
All right, thank you. Future Homes and Revitalization Project, we allocated $510,000 and it's pending because
Sure, so this is a program submitted by StartRite, one of three. And I'll also talk about the Caledonia, which is row 24, Caledonia Homes and also both of these are housing projects. And with housing projects, there are certain federal guidelines that apply, especially when you are buying and selling property. And so the concern that we had here was that any profit made by the selling of the properties, even though it being affordable home properties, that StartRite would make would then entail StartRite to give those essentially income dollars to the city, in which the city would have to give those income dollars back to Treasury. And so the complication of just the logistical and administrative complication that is entailed with these two housing projects, we are exploring options. And they being, whether we stick to the nonprofit grants in that program, and we are taking additional caution and discussing with our housing experts at Guidehouse to figure out a way we can move forward with these two under the nonprofit grant program. There are a couple of other options. We could fund them still with ARPA funds, but with a different category, meaning that they would not be subject to some of the reporting requirements required for the housing projects. And it would be, a lot of, I think, let's just say administrative burden for both the city and StartRite to undergo if we kept them in the nonprofit grant program. And so we're exploring those options. We want to make sure we are choosing the option that best one protects the city, that we are making sure that all of the requirements by Treasury are being fulfilled. And also, we want to be mindful of timeline. So the expenditure date for all of these projects are December of 2026. And some of the housing projects we know may have their own timeline that we cannot control just based off market, contractors. And so we're taking our time, taking a little bit more time to do some additional review, both within Guidehouse and with the administration.
Madam Chair, just if I could add a little bit to that as well.
Sure.
I want to make it very clear before the market for rumors opens up. We are doing this with the specific and deliberate intent to fulfill council's funding decisions. So I want to make that very clear. We are not engaging in this sort of creative problem solving with the idea that we will not fund what council set forth to fund. But we're trying to do this in a way that both protects us and frankly will protect the organization as well from any issues down the road with the federal government. So I just want to make that very clear that it is our intention to move forward with the funding of these organizations. We just want to do it in a way that's safe for the city and for the organization.
is there any projected timeline on that decision making?
I don't think we have an exact timeline. I think probably Guidehouse has, I'm thinking probably end of June we'll be probably done with this, is my guess.
Sorry. Go ahead, Patrick.
I'm sorry, done with what at the end of June?
Done with the decision making and the process by which we fund these organizations.
So if I remember correctly, Guidehouse was hoping to have contracts to council before Memorial Day. So for these four, am I hearing that could be a little later than the others?
Sure.
Where is Future Heights on here? Am I missing it or something?
It's the
Is-
Future Homes and
Homes
Revitalization Project.
We had
So
not
that's Future
yet.
Heights?
We can move on to that line item, but
So that's Future Heights.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the other ones are the Cleveland Heights Improvement Court?
CIC and then StartRite Has two.
The Good Neighbor Project.
They
CIC,
have Startright has a remodeling project, which is called their
that's the Good Neighbor.
and yes, and then Startright has the Caledonia Homes infill as well. So my spreadsheet is not in the same order, which is causing problems, I'm sorry about that.
That's okay.
So,
Go ahead.
yeah, Priyam, so any of these programs where homes are built and then sold, and then the money possibly used to continue the program, maybe even far after 2026, is, same thing with flipping, I'm sorry I'm using this term, but, the flip, the revital, what am I trying to say? Rehabs, housing rehabs, and then using that money once the house is sold to continue the program. Are those just problematic or are they not allowed?
It depends on the particular project. So, they tend to be, and I'll use your words, problematic only in the sense of reporting and making sure all of the dollars are expended by the end of 2026. Typically, Treasury wants to see that any program for ARPA, under ARPA truly benefits the community, which in this case it does, right? It's affordable housing. However, when there is a situation in which that organization is making any type of revenue or income, and that's not going back out to the community, that's when there is cause for concern. And that those monies may be required to be given back to Treasury. And so that's the issue that we face with Startright in their housing projects and figuring out the funding stream and the proper expenditure category under ARPA guidance to move forward without any of the complications.
So just for an example, if Startright was to build an infill house and it was built by next year and they put $300,000 into it and got $300,000 back on the sale, they couldn't then take that money next year, let's just say the house was built by next year, and then contract for another infill house. The money would have to go to Treasury.
So that's what we're trying to figure out with our housing expert, because in this case, their grant application talks about this particular housing project, not future housing projects. And those projects, we don't know the details of those projects, right? Whether that's next year or the year after. And so we can't assess risk. We can't really determine eligibility, even though likely more affordable housing. And so that's where it gets a little bit complicated. There are also certain real property requirements that go along with any type of purchasing and selling property. And we just want to make sure the city understands those requirements, is able and has capacity to submit those to Treasury if we move forward with this program in the nonprofit grant program.
Madam Chair.
I think to reduce complication, there's an alternative category that we could use to still move forward with this program, as the mayor suggested. We're just wanting to make sure we have all the details in place before we make that decision.
Okay, and on the Community Improvement Corporation, it is a nonprofit, but you want to change it to what? I mean, technically it is a nonprofit, so I'm just wondering what,
CIC.
yeah, the CIC, yeah. So,
We wouldn't change the nonprofit. Are you asking, I believe the city, the administration is interested in keeping that as the nonprofit.
Just a
No,
right, but I'm saying categorize, I mean,
Mayor Sarah?
one further complicating factor is it's a nonprofit under Ohio law, but it is not a 501c3.
right.
And so that might be a bit of a complicating factor, but either way, and this is, we're not, it's not quite fully baked yet, but we're looking at a way to address some of these concerns, like I said, that will keep the city and those organizations a bit safer and reduce their administrative burden for reporting, or possibly returning revenues from their activities to the federal government indirectly. And so we may be bringing an alternative as Ms. Khan suggested, to council to see if there's a way that we can address those concerns and fund these organizations in a way that provides more flexibility.
Councilor Russell.
Karen, does the rules still apply the same for revitalization for homes under the Future Heights if they revitalize homes and then sell them?
So similar concerns with Future Heights, and I believe that's row 22 for their proposed Future Homes Revitalization Program. There is concern that there's not a current executive director in place. I believe, we've been in conversation for technical assistance sessions with the board. And there is a line item in their budget where they want to fund a full-time position, a program manager, to then carry out this Future Homes and Revitalization Program. However, that individual has not yet been hired. They are dependent on ARPA money for that. So there's just some concerns around staffing, lack of leadership, organizational structure. And that is cause for concern to put this one at a higher risk. And so we do want to continue to do some reviews to get clarity around timing of program implementation, hiring of the project manager of the new ED. And then of course, the purchasing and selling of, homes.
Well, yes, that was my question. So if everything went well with them, even if they're doing revitalization of oh Lord, I can't even talk today, of the properties and then selling them, will that still come under the same guidelines of actually building a new home and selling them?
Yes, it would be the same guidelines because they're still selling the property. And that's where it will trigger some additional reporting required, as well as any income from those properties.
Okay, thank you.
We're good, anybody else? I'm gonna open it up to general questions because we had questions about the process, Graham. And one of the questions that arose from the session with Heights Arts was a city is considering a reimbursement process rather than providing dollars for upfront costs. And that what's stated in their memo to you that most projects of this nature require an upfront payment with process payments following if even possible. This will put Heights Arts in a precarious financial position. Can you speak to that, please, as to how that could possibly be different? The disbursement of the funds, can it depend on the organization's needs, or is it gonna be a carte blanche, everybody has to follow the same paradigm?
Yeah, so funding, we want to make sure it is equitable among all of the nonprofits. We recently did decide with the administration that 25% of funds would be provided upfront, and that particular statement will be in the contract. And so all of the nonprofits will be made aware, if they haven't been already, that they will receive 25% of their funding upfront, and then thereafter will be based on a reimbursement submission. So they'll have to submit a monthly invoice, and as long as that's approved by our interim finance director, then they will go ahead and receive payment.
A timeline again in terms of when that upfront money would be distributed?
So right now, the timeline is that we hope to go in front of council May 20th with contracts for council to authorize the administration to move forward with each of the nonprofits. So I imagine, 2 weeks or so after that date, hopefully the nonprofits can, the contracts will be approved and signed and payment can be submitted.
Go ahead, Councilor Petros.
It's great to hear that there's an accommodation where these groups could receive 25% of the funding up front. It seems like after they use that 25% for the things that it was allocated for, that they might still have issues. paying for the expenses upfront for the remainder of the 75,000, or I'm sorry, 75%. And so I'd be interested in hearing from the nonprofits what their thoughts are on that sort of arrangement.
So in our discussions with each of the nonprofits, there was not concern. You know, I think for the nonprofits that we were able to share the 25% upfront. And again, you know, we did hold at least 2 TA sessions with almost all of the nonprofits. Majority of them did express, you know, I think they're used to either getting state funding, federal funding, and so they're used to the reimbursement process. There are a few that are concerned about making those payments, and that's where we assessed the 25% would certainly cover those concerns in getting the money upfront for the organizations.
Council. So Graham, thank you. So that sort of leads to a broader question. I know that at least one nonprofit reached out and requested that there be a single meeting for all of the nonprofits. I think that I've talked with almost all of the groups, and one of the frustrations that they've shared with me is a sense that they're getting different messages. And so they would like clarity, have the same message delivered to all of them and an opportunity to ask clarifying questions. Because even right now, you shared that arrangement with the groups and it seemed like it worked for everyone, but there are a number of nonprofits in this room right now and they're shaking their head no, that they're not aware of that. So I think that if you're available, it would be really helpful for them.
Yeah, so there will be a subsequent training that all the nonprofits will be invited to. And at that time, that's actually, and I misspoke, at that time, that's where we're gonna share details around reporting requirements as well as payment schedule, that 25% upfront. That is the purpose of this that we're going to hold, either, you know, depending on their availability. So we wanted to first get in front of council, have this discussion, and then to later today follow up with all the nonprofits via email, asking on their availability a couple weeks for training. And that's during that formal training is when we would review all of the requirements, payment schedule, invoicing, the 25% upfront. So my apologies, I did misspeak and shared that a little bit too soon.
And that would be before the contracts, is that right?
I'm sorry?
Would that be before the contracts are done? So that they have an opportunity
So
to
we
provide
are
feedback?
Yeah, we are in the process of drafting contracts. And we see that as kind of parallel track with the process we're undergoing now. So with the training, with these presentations.
Thank you.
Councilor Maddox.
I was just gonna make a general statement, just typically, no organization would get a full allocation, so what she's discussing is something that's typical across the board. I've seen it as low as 10%, as high as 75%, but typically, you're gonna wanna revisit that even as you're allocating funds to an organization to make sure it's still within alignment. From a risk standpoint, it keeps you in a place where if something is off, you haven't fully funded or 50% funded or a program or a project that isn't working. And so it allows you those steps to go through. So I just wanted to kind of explain to the public one of those reasons that you also allocate funds that way. It's a helpful tool in terms of making sure that they get what they need in terms of what they're using now. And I'm not saying that 25% works for all those organizations, but just the thought process behind it, I kind of just wanted to explain that. It allows us to be able to go back in and take a look and see if there's any issues with what was already allocated before there's too much funding. And so just to give just a broader understanding of that. And that's typical across most nonprofits or organizations that are receiving any kind of government funds.
Councilor Cobb.
So just to follow up on this, to clarify, this 25% requirement, is that from ARPA or is that something that we're imposing here for accounting and for, I guess, risk management purposes?
I would say the latter. You know, ARPA does not have any statements around percentages upfront. Typically, what we've seen based on our analysis in other communities, particularly with the state of Ohio, you know, 25% is kind of the highest percentage you want to go without assuming too much risk. So it is based on a risk analysis, you know, versus something that the Treasury stated that communities should undergo.
And then a follow-up, and I don't know the answer to this, and maybe the mayor or our acting finance director. For our block grant funding that we're due to nonprofits, are we following that same 25%?
I think we'd probably be better off talking with Brian Iorio, AD of Community Development on that,
Okay.
cause I don't have that information off the top of my head.
Councilor Russell first, and then we'll come back to you.
So after the 25%, did I hear that there will be an invoice, and then after an invoice, then additional funds will be distributed?
Yes, so they would still have to submit any type of receipts and justification for the monies, the 25% that was expended. And then thereby after, on a monthly basis, they will submit an invoice, and as long as it's all looks good and it's approved, they will receive payment.
What is the additional percentage of additional funds after the 25%?
Reimbursement basis. So they have to pay for everything up front beyond that 25%, and then they would be reimbursed.
Okay.
Councilor
That's a lot of money for some
President
groups.
Kudo.
Thank you. A few things. Journey Center is concerned because they were never asked about payments. So just throwing that out there to that you guys should talk about that. If on the 4 allocations, the CIC and the Future Homes and Good Neighbor Project in Caledonia Homes infill, if for some reason they were denied, could they reapply, for that particular thing, it just didn't work out? Could they reapply in a different way for funds that was done in such a way that it would be congruent with the program and federal guidelines?
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, Administration, I don't believe there's a need for them to reapply. As the mayor stated, the intention for the administration is to move forward in funding all of these programs, including the ones that you see here in red. It is just a matter of the funding stream or the funding source under the categories we have for ARPA. And so right now, we are discussing the nonprofit grants program. And that is a separate program under all of the city's ARPA funding in which these particular nonprofits and programs will be funded through. And then, there are other city projects that the administration is working on that will be separate agreements and separate programs under separate expenditure categories under the larger ARPA guidance. And I'm happy to provide, what those, maybe in a later meeting or just as a follow-up, what those categories are, how usually things are, categorized under ARPA, depending on the program or project proposed.
Okay, so reapplication probably not necessary though. How often, so once the contracts are sent out and approved by council, how often can council expect to get quarterly reports or so forth on, expenditures and how it's going, just kind of those kind of things?
Sure, so one thing I didn't mention and I wanted to make clear is that, with each of the nonprofits, there will be a monthly monitoring call or meeting in which we go over a progress report. And so they submit how the program is going that they proposed, any barriers, challenges, as well as invoicing, right? If there are any complications in paying for items up front, if we didn't receive payment from them, of course, we need follow up on that. So we'll have the opportunity to speak with each of them on a monthly basis to get a progress report on financials as well as program implementation. And we are happy to share with council on a monthly basis and how those meetings go and any updates, maybe, all together, we can work with you on that schedule, and whether it's in a meeting such as this or an email update, we're happy to provide that update on a monthly basis.
So how would you suggest that we make sure we do that?
I think, I certainly want to hear from everybody on council. If they want to do it in committee of the whole, that's fine. I'd be fine with the finance committee monitoring this and then reporting out. But it depends on how much time we have.
We can talk about that
Yeah.
then.
Look, one last question on the exterior repair program, I know that's not part of the nonprofit category, but can you update us on where we are with that?
Sure, so that's another program that's similar to the nonprofit housing projects we're looking a little bit more into in terms of which category makes sense. And as well as talking to our housing expert at Guidehouse to figure out a way forward to best protect the city. And so further conversation to be had. I'm happy to provide an update once we know a little bit more.
Okay. No timeline right now.
So I think June is an accurate timeline. By end of June, I imagine we'll have all of the decisions made, potentially even contracts in place. And so I think, give us about a month, and we'll have updates for you.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Petrus.
Priam, I request that we do a better job at setting expectations with the nonprofits. I am really grateful that we had a meeting on the 12th where we got a really thorough update from you and we got a timeline. I think that it would be really nice if the nonprofits could receive that as well. And I think that it's really important that once we set those expectations, that we stick to those timelines that we created. The timeline that was shared with us on the 12th, for example, I think the notice of awards said that that would be done by the 19th, and we're talking about that now. So whatever expectations we set, I think that it's important that we actually meet those so that groups know what to anticipate. I think along with that, I've heard one of the other frustrations that I've heard from groups is that they will go a long time without hearing from Guidehouse and then just be abruptly asked for something. So out of the blue, they'll receive an email saying, we need this documentation within 2 days, or, could you meet with us within the next 2 days? And I think that by setting those expectations, that will help to alleviate that so that the groups can anticipate that, in 2 weeks, Guidehouse is going to want to talk with us about something. And then I also think sort of on that note, or in that same sort of communication vein, that we make a better effort at responding to groups, because I know that a lot of nonprofits have reached out to me personally saying, hey, we've reached out to Guidehouse, we sent this email along and we've heard nothing. We've reached out multiple times, we've heard nothing. So I request, if it's possible, that we do a better job at setting expectations, sticking to those expectations that we've set, that we don't abruptly ask people for things, and that we do our best to get back to them in a timely manner. And it's certainly fine to say, hey, I'm busy right now, but I just wanted to acknowledge receipt of your email and that we'll get to this in 2-3 days, something like that.
Sure, I hear you, Councilmember. Thank you for sharing that feedback. So, we've done our best. I think some of the frustrations that maybe came out of, so each program that was submitted is different from another, right? So there's no program that's the same. Each grant application had different intent, different program design, different budget line items. So each one required that individual kind of back and forth, whether it's through technical assistance or email. We certainly tried our best to respond to every email that's hit either my inbox or my team's inbox. And from my observation, we've tried our best to be timely, and we'll continue to do that as we move forward. I think that's where the training, where we bring all the nonprofits in one room, go over the timeline, expectations, that will be very helpful in moving things forward and making sure we are communicating consistently, frequently. Again, we will have those monthly monitoring sessions with each nonprofit where there's an opportunity to raise any concerns, ask questions, and of course, happy to answer questions outside of those monthly meetings. We will certainly make ourselves available to that. But I hear you, and we will do our best moving forward. I think, initially, we just want to make sure there were things that, just due to the legislation being passed a little bit abruptly last year, and not doing the due diligence in the grant application, there was information that both the administration and Guidehouse were not aware of. And so we had to make sure that, one, the nonprofit understood the eligibility requirements and what was expected under the Treasury guidelines, as well as we had to do due diligence. And we wanted to make sure, that's why it's taken some time to work with each nonprofit to get everyone in a place where we can move forward without concern.
Mayor Saren?
Thank you. So I think, we all know this is not a simulation. And things don't always progress according to neatly established expectations. What is it? Everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face kind of situation. These things are organic. And I appreciate, and I think that we should do our best to endeavor to stick to the expectations that we set. At the same time, I do want to advise all of the organizations that council chose to fund through ARPA dollars that these things do take time. And the fact that, for instance, council took 3 years to come up with these funding decisions, you're gonna have to allow this process, this administrative process to take place. And, making sure that we're fulfilling our fiduciary duty to the city government, and that we are not setting ourselves up for failure, both in terms of funding organizations that can't expend the dollars in the way that they expect to, but also with the concern that we may be working towards something that will be a black mark on the city with the federal government and funding in the future. That's something that we have to pay very close attention to, because I fully expect to be asking the federal government for a lot more money moving forward, and I don't want this to be something that inhibits that. And funders definitely look at previous behavior when it comes to funding decisions when they're making future funding decisions. So that's something I want to be very, very careful about in this circumstance, and I don't want us to have to give any of this money back. So we are definitely doing our due diligence. We are not rushing through this. And I do want to take a little bit of exception with the characterization that we are abruptly asking for information that an established nonprofit should be able to provide. We can't more gradually ask for documentation. There's an ask, and as it was with the initial request for a standardized application, clearly, we've got a timeline. The federal government set a timeline. And that timeline is that we have to make these contractual decisions and determinations before the end of this year, and that the spending has to take place over the next couple of years. Beyond that, though, the timeline depends on the interaction between the city and the nonprofit organizations. We were handed legislation that provided some relatively vague funding determinations. And we had to work through that, work with some of these nonprofits in part to modify what they were expecting to do so that we could fund it in a safer way. And that's something that just takes a little bit of time. I recognize the impatience, and I'm not saying impatience is a bad thing. But we've got competing motivations here, and I hope that the council can respect and understand that.
I would like to weigh in on that, Mayor Saren, because honestly, one of the frustrations has been that the previous leadership team for council was working with the House to some extent. And these new applications that everybody had to do in the nonprofit world, it was like, to me, it was a perception that the nonprofits didn't have the guidelines that they have now. So that's why there's been a lot of frustration about having to feel like they're reapplying. So I just want to share that with you. And I think if we can go forward and we're exchanging communicate information on a regular basis, that we will all feel better about this process and that people will feel included, whether they're the nonprofits or the council members, and also with your own staff. So I'd like to just move forward on that.
I'll yield to him because I think he want to ask a question. I have something different.
I do think that it's important that we're responsive to these groups, and it's not a matter of groups being impatient. There are a lot of cases where groups submitted their applications and they didn't hear a single word for 4, 5, 6 weeks. And these groups themselves even reached out repeatedly asking, what are the next steps, so that we could set expectations for ourselves, and just didn't hear back. And I know that that was the case for a lot of groups that are here in this room today. And they just want to understand, what should we expect? Because there are a lot of instances where these groups have been abruptly asked, and abruptly is the correct word, abruptly asked to meet within the next 2 days. What's your availability? We need an executive to meet with us within the next 2 days. That is difficult for some of these groups. It would be difficult for me, and I'm sure that it would be difficult for you overseeing such a large organization. And so it's important that we as a city do better at communicating with groups.
We have some other questions, but go ahead if you
I
can
think
make.
in response to that in particular, I completely understand that sometimes people have scheduling conflicts. And in those occurrences, somebody can say, well, I've got a scheduling conflict, can we meet next week? And then the answer to that would be, of course, we can meet next week. Now, as the leader of a relatively large organization, my schedule gets pretty packed, and it can be difficult to accommodate a short notice request to meet. I will say, however, that if there was an organization that wanted to give me, let's say, $200,000, I'd be there. And I would find a way to make that happen now, or I would find somebody in my organization who can be there and provide whatever information is necessary to receive that grant. But I do want to say to your point, Chairwoman, that over the last couple years, it was made very clear to the administration that the funding decisions were going to be made by council. And the administration was not included in that discussion. That was something that was made explicitly clear to me. And so we pulled back and we allowed council to go through its process. And I'll tell you, from my perspective as the head of the administration, I think the administration probably would have done things a bit differently and made different funding decisions or different funding recommendations to the legislative body and the budgetary authority. And in all likelihood, we would have had less of sort of the bringing nonprofits in to request some sort of proposal to, provide this federal funding to those organizations. And it would have been focused a different way. And so we wouldn't be dealing with some of this right now, but we are where we are. And so this is a bit more of a complicated situation. I'm very happy that Guidehouse is on the team to make sure that we're protected as an organization from any misuse of the funds and not intentional misuse of the funds, but use of the funds that would violate some of the restrictions that the federal government has placed on it. But there has been a lot of education, I think, up to this point. And I do hope, to the councilman's point, that at this moment, they understand what the next steps are. And if that is the case, and I hope it is the case, if anybody in the room doesn't have an understanding about what the next steps are, maybe we could revisit it, just to make sure everybody is aware. And then we can move on from there.
Councilor Russell?
Yes, I'm on a different subject, Prem. Shoot, I almost lost it. Is there any flexibility with the second round of funds? I'm a little concerned if a nonprofit gets 25% of the funding and they submit all of their documentation and invoice, and then they have to pay for things up front. Addie, if you need to move back just a little, okay, sorry. If they would have to submit their documentation and then pay for things up front, some of the nonprofits may not be able to afford to do that. Is there some flexibility with different nonprofits that you said some of them are different as far as what they're asking and the way they operate, and maybe giving some of those nonprofits a percentage up front where they're not always chasing behind the funding that they are allocated?
Thank you for your question. So yes, I think, we want to be mindful that we are equitable with all of the nonprofits. So if we're saying, 25% upfront, every nonprofit has the opportunity to receive that 25% of that total funding upfront. Now, we do, as I mentioned, this is why we want to do the training sessions sooner or later, but we want to give the nonprofits enough time to be able to schedule that in their busy schedules. To be able to talk that through and what that looks like. If the nonprofit were to raise their hand and say, hey, this is just not gonna work for me, we can certainly take it case by case basis,
Okay.
review the barriers and challenges that, and then work with our law department and making sure those contract terms are reflected, so it works for the nonprofit. But there are certain equity considerations that I believe is important for the city to undertake. And so right now we are saying 25% upfront for all. If we have one-on-one conversations and that's just not doable for a nonprofit, I think we can go back to the administration, to our law department and see what can be done. However, from an equity perspective, as well as even I'm sure for the interim finance director, even for making sure that we're getting funds out the door and making sure the contracts are complete in the next few weeks. This is what we
I'm not talking about the 25% itself. I have no problem with that. I understand that. I have a nonprofit myself, so I understand a lot of the guidelines and the distribution of funds of piecemealed or all at once, and the different grants and things you have to apply for to be funded through a nonprofit. My question was basically, which you did answer, the flexibility if a nonprofit gets into a situation once they have received the 25%, now they are actually being reimbursed for funds that they may not have. Will there be some flexibility to be able to talk to them and maybe give them additional funds a little bit at a time so they're not already chasing that money?
Yeah, I think there's opportunity to have those conversations with the nonprofits.
Thank you.
And work with the administration.
Thank you.
Councilor Maddox?
Thank you. I just want to go back for a moment to the previous conversation, just to clarify a couple of things. I recognize that there's some frustration between the nonprofits, and that was articulated specifically to Guidehouse. But from a process standpoint, I just want to make it clear to everyone at this table that this isn't just an issue, any process or miscommunication between Guidehouse or just the administration of this council. And so I want to make it clear, because I feel like we're leaning in a little bit on some folks who are only touching part of that process. So I just want to make that clear that I sat at this table and I stated that there were major questions that I had about this process and the way we were doing this, that there was much more that needed to happen than just approving the budget, but how we would go about distributing this. So a lot of this frustration that we're sensing now would have been resolved had the council talked about that process and worked alongside the administration to develop this as we went along. But again, we spent so much time just allocating the funds, but a lot of this was missed and dropped. One of the things that I would suggest as a council, and this is something that feedback that I get from nonprofits, organizations across the city, is I wouldn't have waited to come into this room at this table to share all of that. I would have communicated it at least to council leadership or the administration, or at least reached out to the organization prior to that, because a lot of these are small fires that could have been adjusted, or things that could have been adjusted before they impacted other organizations. So I would just encourage us, if we're getting that amount of level of feedback from organizations, to find a way to articulate or communicate that when these things are happening, because it helps to resolve issues as they're coming up. Otherwise, it just looks like there's this big gotcha moment we're trying to have, and then there's this tension, and that's what you're seeing right now at this table. And so that's where that miscommunication comes from. So I just want to make it clear, if I'm going to have an issue with the process or something that we've collectively built together, I would definitely have that conversation with at least the administration or council leadership before I sat at this table, so we could talk about any resolutions or how to resolve that prior to that. Because a lot of this sounds like this didn't just come up in the last 24 hours before we got to this table. This is feedback that at least from what I'm hearing seems to have been coming up for a period of time. So maybe if I'm wrong, I need some clarification, but I just think that would help a lot of this, is if as this was coming up during this process, that's part of process improvement, is dealing with things as they're coming up rather than holding them all in and just spreading it out on the table and giving it over to Guidehouse, who's just simply our consultant. So I just want to make sure that there has to be another partnership and responsibility and onus, not just on them, but on the administration and this council to work through these processes. Thank you.
Councilor Petrus, can you move us on, or
Well,
I really
So
need to move the
I do
meeting
want to
on.
respond to that, and then one other thing. So I would say that most weeks since joining council, nonprofits have reached out to me hoping that I could help move things along, because they have tried to bring things up to both Guidehouse and the administration, and they're just not hearing back. I personally tried to privately get updates on these things. I tried, as the administration is aware, I tried many, many times to receive updates on these things privately. And I wasn't getting it. I would just get no responses, or I would be told no. And so this isn't something that just came up. But to the question that I was going to ask, so Priyam, during the meeting on the 12th, you shared that we're working on the application for the businesses. And so we're hoping to make that available in May. Is that still our expectation, that we'll be able to make that application available this month?
No, I shared that we would be able to make those applications available in June. So we are starting the process in June. And that's when we will go ahead and share our application with the administration, get any approvals. We're happy, just based, I'll just reiterate, our client is the administration. If they want to share with any other individual around this table or with City Council, we're certainly happy to do that. But that process will begin in June. We want to make sure we take the time and diligence to wrap up the nonprofit process this month. And then after the holiday, begin the small business. And I do want to address, I appreciate all the comments made around the table. I want to first share that the administration, the mayor has hired Guidehouse for, to help with external communications. So we will take that on, and it's not a reflection of the city or the mayor's office. That is on Guidehouse. And I do believe some of the statements that were made were inaccurate, specifically by you, Councilmember Petrus. I think the city team and the Guidehouse team has worked really, really hard to make any accommodation. For any type of delay in a meeting or communication, we did receive notifications where some leaders were out of town for a week and needed to wait to talk to us. That happened on 2 occasions. So I'm happy to share records if that's requested, but I do want to share that I think both, it's been hard work, and we want to make sure that we are following the process the mayor stated, and we are accommodating with each of the nonprofits on their schedules and their busy workloads, as well as the city's schedule. So we've tried our best to communicate on a timely basis, and we'll continue to do so. And that is our responsibility, and we completely understand that, and we'll hold true to that moving forward. But I do think that training in person or virtual training will really help set the expectations and timeline moving forward. And then we'll continue the email back and forth as well, if not some specific questions.
Is there a date for the training?
Have you established a date for the training?
So no, right after this meeting, we will send a communication to the nonprofits on a couple different options, either this week or next week. Again, we want to be mindful of that May 20th date, as well as getting the training out sooner to the nonprofits. I think will help them kind of understand expectations, payment schedule. If there are concerns right now, we can address those as they come sooner or later.
Thank you. I'm going to recognize Ms. Bernstein just for a moment. Is there something that's concerning you that can be addressed right now?
Well, I'm happy to give just a real life example of what Heights Arts and apparently a lot of other organizations have come why we're here. So, but first I wanted to address your use of the word equitable, because equitable does not mean treating everybody the same, because as you mentioned, all of our projects are different. So I really want you to make sure that when you say that it's equitable, that's not the definition of the word. So, but in terms of when we're talking about scheduling meetings, yes, we were told about meetings with less than a week's notice, and we all made that happen. It was more about returning the information that was required within 2 days. For Heights Arts, that was very difficult because we have a complicated project and we had to bring a lot of people in. We were told on Tuesday that there was a meeting with the city on Friday, and we had to have that meeting. We had to have all of the information, a revised budget and timeline without knowing when we were gonna be paid to the city, which is virtually impossible for some of our organizations. But we did it. But I will say that we still have never heard from Guidehouse. It was a surprise to me that our budget was approved because we gave 3 different budgets. They've never acknowledged that they received my request, yet I'm finding out today that it was approved. So I don't know which budget was approved, which timeline was approved. There's been no communication. So these are some of the issues that at least I have had, and you may all have other issues. So that's just it's not about necessarily the timing of the meetings, it's about the request for information that will make or break our projects with only 2 days' notice.
Thank you. So we agreed that we're gonna be communicating with all the nonprofits, and I look forward to hearing that everybody has the information that they need to move forward. I, as chair, have a couple of questions. First of all, for Director Schuster, do you have a format that you will be giving to the nonprofits that would allow them to give you the information you need to reimburse them when they get after they've gotten the 25% down? Is there something in the structure that you like to see so that it makes it easier for your staff to process the accounts payable?
There'll be forms and instructions
Okay,
that will be passed out to everyone.
thank you. And then I noticed on the spreadsheet that we got that, and perhaps you can answer this, Mayor, the police locker room allocation was zeroed out. So are we funding that through general fund or?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, those are all the questions I had. How's everybody else doing?
Good.
Kuda.
I mean, I would just say, first of all, Priyanam, we really appreciate all of your hard work. This program is, something, it's unprecedented. And I realize that does create a lot of situations where, when you're dealing with things for the first time, it really cannot, it's not a realistic expectation for everything to go smoothly. Just please appreciate council has an oversight role. We do, even hiring you. And, there was a role for council and there is a role. And sometimes oversight can be a little bit contentious, but really what it's meant to do was just get the information out. And if there's any corrections, like we talked on the phone the other day and you said, I think I'm gonna use a doodle poll instead of, so that was like a little minor course correction. And that's what should come out of this is just, solutions to problems. Some of them are minor, some of them maybe are a little bigger, some of them are emotional in the moment, some of them are things that probably really need to be addressed. And, if anything is said and it's, well, maybe you don't agree with that, I mean, that's fine, because if you don't say it, and you don't get feedback, then we're not doing our role. So, but I'm pleased that we're moving forward. It looks like May and June will be 2 really productive months for getting these programs moving, and I appreciate the administration. This is a lot of work, and it's complicated. So, thanks to all.
President Kuda, a question for you.
Yeah.
We still have, at this point in time, $278,703 that left to allocate. Plus, we've also determined that there are gonna be all those quantities up there that will come back into what we have left to allocate. So we'll need to have a meeting on that,
We sure
schedule it
do.
for the whole council or however you wanna handle it, okay?
And I would very much like to speak with, the administration about that as well. Because I think this is an opportunity for some of the work that maybe we want to do but didn't get to.
Councilor Petros.
Graham, am I remembering correctly that during the last meeting you shared that there's a little more than $5 million of revenue replacement dollars that have not been allocated yet?
No, I'm sorry. If I could.
We've got clarification on that.
Yeah,
Could I get
I'm so sorry I didn't I don't know, I thought I shared it. That was the money that we already allocated for the Stramp and for the, yeah.
Safe and all those.
Let's Safe and North Rink and
Okay,
King Park. I mean, there was several things, yeah. So there's not 5 million left over.
okay.
Anybody else? A good order? Councilor Maddox.
I just want to again tell Priam, thank you so much for this today. I know that this was a very interesting meeting for me, and I'm hoping in the future that we can come together collectively, both the council and administration with you, to make sure that communication is clear. And I just want to encourage this council. I know sometimes you get feedback. I think how we communicate, it does matter. And those words that we use in terms of the feedback that we get from others and that opportunity. And so I'm looking forward to moving forward from this process today. But I want to thank you for the work that you and the team do. I just want to say thank you, and I appreciate it.
Councilor Russell.
And this is slightly off the subject, Prim, but just because residents may be watching and the small profits may be small businesses may be watching as well. So their applications may be coming out in June, correct?
Yes, so we are starting the process with the city in the beginning of June with the administration, and so we're happy to share each step of that process, and the date that application will be made public is to be decided, it's not yet determined.
Okay, I understand it's not in stone. Can you give a estimate time of what that process will look like for the small businesses? So if they're listening now, they can start preparing for the process to come?
Sure, so for the month of June, I would expect some type of announcement or communication around what that process looks like for the small businesses, and that will likely be an application that they have to fill out with the due date. We want to make sure we give them ample time to fill out that application. So we just want to make sure we discuss those timelines with the city before we make that public. But they will have some time to fill out that application. Again, similar to the nonprofits, we're happy to provide technical assistance sessions if they have questions on the application itself or just about the process. But before sharing any timelines publicly, I do want to make sure we Guidehouse speaks with the administration to discuss that timeline and what's feasible for them as well.
Understood, but thank you very much for that general feedback of what they need to expect and the timelines they need to start watching for applications. Thank you.
Everybody okay? Thank you so much, Priam. This has been very, very helpful to me and all of us here today. Thank you, Director Schuster, for your help with these spreadsheets and stuff. Thank you, Mayor, for attending, and thank Administrator Williams and everyone else in the room. I appreciate it. I'm going to adjourn this meeting at 11:12. Meeting adjourned.